Hi, everyone. This is Adam Asnes. I'm from Lingoport. We have a few guests with us. We have Etienne Kroger with us. We were supposed to have another guest, Jennifer. Unfortunately, she could not make it at the last minute. So all of our attention goes to grilling Etienne in this webinar, but I think that'll go fine. We also have Simon from Vistatec. He leads marketing there. And this is really a joint webinar between our two companies, because there's a lot of synergy that we can bring together here and talk about in the marketplace and bring to you. Now, before we kind of jump into the material, I want to just direct your attention to the Zoom interface. And all during the webinar, you can ask a question. We probably won't take the questions until the very end, just because it's hard to monitor that as a speaker at the same time. But we will take your questions. And I always suggest to people to write the question down right away. There are no bad questions, really. And then if you're worried that you'll write something down and we'll say the same thing on the next slide or whatever, really don't worry about that. That's really fine. But if you're like me, if you don't write the question, then you're thinking about the question and not able to pay attention. That's what I do. I am coming to you from an Airbnb. I'm traveling, and I haven't been able to figure out the furnace here. So it's cold. I haven't found a thermostat, so that's why I've got a jacket on. I don't mean to be rude. But anyway, we're going to jump in here now. It always takes a couple of minutes for some people to log in. I want to mention that a lot of you logged in early. That's very nice of you. We really appreciate that. Okay, good. Now, we're going to jump into the material. All right. During this webinar, we are going to talk about, sort of some basic functionality and then dive into questions. But it's kind of important to set the table a little bit on what we're talking about before we just jump into it. In terms of introductions, Etienne, I know Etienne for many years. He's worked on both the localization side and the client side of product development, of localization engineering. He's really kind of done it all. He has experience with both Google and Meta. He's really seen product production and localization needs really at every stage of software product development. So he's a great guest for us to have. Of course, Simon Hodgkins, he's the CMO at Vistatec. Now, Vistatec is a really strong software-oriented localization company. So you might imagine that Lingoport and Vistatec have been best buddies for a lot of years, and that is the case. Lingoport, for those of you new to our company, we have software solutions that are entirely focused on product development that is going to be localized. So that's internationalization software in the form of Globalizer and localization systems in the form of Localizer. Kind of innovative names, right? Naming it the obvious. But in any case, we're really going to talk about the role and what we mean by shifting left and the opportunities that are available to fundamentally raise the visibility and power of localization within product development circles. So I want to just mention what I mean by shifting left. When I say shift left, what I really mean is earlier in the development cycle about how things get built. Now, software in the old days, there might be a little bit of requirements and talk about it, but there wasn't so much, in the old days around UI development. Now, of course, we have a ton of brain power that goes into the right color blue and the right layout and all that. And that's actually a really good thing. That's why modern applications are just better looking than, go back 20 years and more intuitive and the like, or at least we hope they are. But really, when it comes to localization, we want to be moving our decision process on localization and how products are getting built into this area. So both requirements gathering and then design. And to do that, there has to be a real visible role. You can't just sort of give that lip service without visibility. It's key to every organization, visibility, visibility. And it's also one of the key agile fundamentals that you have to demonstrate, you have to have visibility, you have to have integration into these various processes. So that's what we'll talk about. Again, traditionally, localization, if you were lucky, kind of started somewhere in here. You'd maybe get a file handoff, or maybe here, or even worse, here in deployment. You really don't want to wait that long. But that is literally how it sometimes happens. And you sort of hope you get all the files you need. So again, when it comes to shifting left, summarizing, localization gets a seat at the table. Remember, localization is what brings in a lot of revenue for the corporations. It is not, we always fight back being a cost center, but the reality is that localization is done for the business case, right? We don't do it just because it's cool. We do it because it's the business case to penetrate the world and have worldwide customers. So we belong up early in how product design is done. So here's a few things, like the impacts are important. Faster, better releases. I often joke that localization bugs, they go into Jira or whatever bug tracking database you're using, and they go there and they die. Why? Because they weren't found early enough. When you find bugs late that like might be translation errors, they might be literal file errors for translation. When you find those late, the problem is human nature oriented. The developers have moved on to the next thing. So you have to really it's all that more effort and heavy lifting to get things fixed. So again, shift left, better products, more global, more seamless. The developers like it as long as you make it easy for them and the like. So, and wow, we have.
Yeah, if I may just jump
Yeah,
in
sure.
here just a little bit, and I'm a little bit the color commentator on this presentation, so I give you
Sure.
like what you would see in soccer games where you have actual players. Um, I think really what it boils down to, and what I see in the current situation, what we've seen over the last few years is that it's a brand new generation really of decision makers and of people who are tasked, with taking their products and getting the revenue globally. And so as a result, I think a lot of the things that are missing are not even seen. You know, we're basically not, those decision makers are brand new and are somewhat missing a very basic math. So very basic math is if you only do and only support English, it's simple, right? It's just one. But then you add, let's say Spanish, right? Then you have two. And then you keep adding more and more languages because you're successful, and that's great. But you can really save a lot of time. You can literally save a lot of trouble and heartache and cash by just going through the math and saying, what is it among all of my 6 locales that I can do as one? And then those locales can focus on what they do best. And everybody on your team can focus on what they do best. And so the French person can focus on the French market and all, the subtle things that you don't even know about. You don't know about them because they're invisible to you. Unless you spend a lot of time in France, you won't know. But so they can focus on that, but at the same time, what you would have done is really made it a common effort that serves all the locales and save tremendously, but reduce a lot of the friction, reduce your cost, and get to the market faster. And that's the biggest frustration that I've seen in recent years. Really, it's an education. It's an education that needs to happen with those new generation. And people like Adam, and thank you so much, to Vistatech for having me here too. It's only my views, so I'm going to offend people and you're going to disagree. But that's the education process, and that education process really starts with you. And so hopefully at the end you can ask your questions and we can go through it. And what I've seen over the years, and at the biggest scale, is that it's working with you that really makes a huge difference. And customizing it for you and educating your teams to this very simple math problem, which Adam explained. We have the internationalization, we do it, we prepare, we put a little thought of it into it, we get people in alignment, and then you're saving yourself a lot of trouble and a lot of missed deadlines and a lot of cost overruns. But I just kind of wanted to preface this, the internationalization, which, believe it or not, younger generations, I think, even the distinction has gotten lost. It's just gotten lost in the unknown, in the invisible. And that's really, I think, the biggest challenge we face in localization and internationalization these days. Sorry, Adam, I let you go back, but, just kind of like the narrative, that to me, that's what it is and what it boils down to.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sort of steamrolling along so we get to the questions, but appreciate that fundamental setting the stage. So I just want to say briefly, Figma is the dominant product that's used in the design stage, and I've got an example showing Figma UI for registration in particular. It's not the only one, but it's something like 90+% market share. And I want to emphasize that we're talking about much more than like a translation plugin, because there's lots of free ones for Figma, but you need something that truly scales around a translation process. So what I'm going to talk about is that, like some of the things that our software does with Figma is, like, for instance, it will, let's say that you're going to a whole bunch of locales, you have those identified. It will pick what will be the longest string or user message, but the longest string that will be translated, and how's that going to be fit. So again, your designer maybe doesn't speak the target locales. I mean, very few designers would speak, say, 8 languages or 12 or 42, but they can actually see what is the worst case that they're going to have to deal with across these locales, rather than trying to make the word fit in a in a button that will it'll just never work. And so the localization person, the translator, would have to like massage what they say so it fits in some little spot, and sometimes it just doesn't. So that's an example of something that lets the designer see, well, what's the impact here that's going to happen? How do I include that in my process? And of course, we've always had pseudo localization for years and years, but that's kind of ugly, and it goes with one expansion, rate mathematically for every word, and it's not quite as accurately as when you take the longest string that will appear. So that's actually a really super useful thing. Again, you're preventing UI issues. You're creating a flexible UI early on, so there isn't a problem later on in development. We're going to talk a little bit more about context. Just like with humans, if you have a visual context of what you're translating, it's much more powerful. Same goes for AI, by the way. We have this way of combining visual context with string location and all that into an AI. And that produces some pretty good results. And then we'll get into how Vistatec targets the review of that kind of a situation, whether it's a traditional workflow or an AI-focused workflow. But you spot those issues early, you reduce that redesign later on. So if you were to look at the whole thing in general ways, there's a lot more than sort of a translation plugin going on at Figma. So again, we will capture the visual context of the interface. We'll also relate every string where it is in that visual context. So the translator, be it machine or human, has that visual context to do a better job. It's translated. You want to use VistatecVerifier to focus on where to review. But there's more to it because there's this really cool thing. So we can return both to Figma and to the repo, which is different. Usually when you translate for Figma, you end up throwing it out or putting it in like translation memory, but it's really not exact. What we do is we actually create the resource files. And because Localizer is all connected to repositories, we stick those already translated files into the repositories that developers will work with the key and everything, and that's all customizable. But the idea is that now localization isn't necessarily falling behind development. It's preceding development. The developers just have to plug in the key and they're up and running, and they're already able to connect and work with, let's say, the 42 languages or 12 languages that you're working towards. And they can actually see that results. They can, sort of toggle through their locale selection and actually see it in their development, which is super cool. And of course, there's always some last minute change, like an error message or something that a developer might add. There are little mini sprints that might not get design involved. That's picked up also. So Localizer pulls out of the repo as well. And last minute changes are handled and all that. But that creating the files for the developers really kind of compresses that localization time frame in a way that hasn't been done before. We call that Figma to dev. So again, I wanted to mention we grab context from Figma. There's also a couple of other ways that we grab context, like if you wanted to manually use a screenshot, still happens a lot. Or if you have a web app, we have a little screen a UI grabber that runs within a browser, for instance, also. But you can see, like, it's probably really hard to see this. This is the word billing. This is billing. This is the visual context of billing within that UI screen. And this is what Localizer looks like. There's what we call command center. That's where you can kind of see everything. And you can see string level changes. That little blue dot means there's an image associated with it. And there's all kinds of controls there for what happens, what's coming from the repo, what's in translation, what's coming back and all. But for us, the source of truth is like, well, what's in the repo? What are the developers seeing? So that's very important. And in a general sense, like this is really high level. What Localizer is doing is it's watching the source control. It also is watching Figma. When there's a change, it picks it up. That's going to be localized. Nobody has to remember to send a file or whatever. It just works, right? And you get measurement of completeness that's in the repo, not what's in the TMS. What matters to the developers is what's in the repo. It channels everything to translation with context, but more than that, it's doing a lot of file checking. You want to make sure that string variables are properly handled, both coming from the developer as well as coming from the translator. And there's something like 45 different checks that we do automatically. And if there's a problem, you literally just click on the problem and it takes you to the repo. And if you have, as long as you have developer permissions, you can just fix it right there. It's very quick. So that's nice. There's also a lot of like locale mapping, just because developers aren't always so good about their locale mapping. There's lots of transformation that can happen and the like. So again, review designers. They're working in Figma. Localizer picks it up, can run a translation right away. It can then do a human translation. You can have what's called a webhook that actually rewrites over that when you have a more sophisticated translation. You can have AI or a human run through the translation with context. You get a lot more accuracy. You have VistatecVerifier. It goes back. It either goes back to Figma if you want it to. You can have that happen automatically with just like a machine translation or an AI translation, or goes into the repository as a finished product for the developer, and it's waiting for them. It's a beautiful thing. All right, I've kind of yacked myself silly. I'm gonna let Simon describe VistatecVerifier, and then we're gonna go into Q&A.
Thank you, Adam. Great to be here with Etienne and yourself, Adam, talking about this. I won't take long, but VistatecVerifier, a really important step here. It's a proprietary AI application that Vistatec has available, and we do use it with a growing number of companies a lot at this stage. And to go over it simply, that diagram on the left-hand side of your screen that you're looking at, that green arrow where it comes over to us, we have a process there that we can use, obviously, as Adam was saying, either humans with AI, AI plus human expertise, we can run it through automated, we can run it through a combination of automated and human, or for some very high risk type data, high risk type translations, you may want human only. So when it comes over to us, we have that stage there. But let's go to the next slide, because I think it helps explain this a little bit better. I'm sorry that the images down the bottom are a little small, but I'll take you through them. So as part of our wider AI suite of services that we rolled out, we had speech services through Vistatec Speech, AI voice, synthesized voice, etc. But we also had VistatecVerifier, which, as I said, it's a proprietary AI application. But what we're doing is we're looking for linguistic errors in the translations themselves. So we're trying to make sure that there's precision, there's consistency, there's quality, all the things that you'd come to expect. And obviously, we've been working with Lingoport for many, many years in many, many different areas. And we're both kind of into the software space. We have our own software development area, and Lingoport in this example with Figma, which has, I don't know, it's about 13 million Figma users, maybe more at this stage, a huge software. It's a great example that Adam's sharing with you here today. So where VistatecVerifier comes into this is, it performs additional QA checks. That's kind of the top line. So those additional QA checks, whether that's spelling or profanity or language or accuracy or any modality issues in the translation. It also has preset options that are available to people that operate VistatecVerifier. And those checks can be modified by a user in certain cases, but there's also an option for users to add additional prompting for additional issue checks. Now, Verifier, it's important to say, Verifier doesn't automatically fix issues. What it does is it indicates the possibility of an issue present. And in this fast-moving content, we need to get it right space. This is a really important tool, particularly where you've got content being outputted, which can be from machine or human AI on its own. So those checks are becoming almost, it's a must-have to make sure that everything is aligning with what's required. And the predefined checks that Verifier is performing along those, profanities and, spelling, etc., and accuracy, and any other sort of discrepancies that we do, That's really, really important. Now, the screens at the bottom, I know they're a little bit hard to see there, but this will be available to people as a recording, so you can take a look at it a bit further. But on the left-hand side, what we're showing here is how we are looking at a source language of English to a target language of French. We're selecting matches to skip. And on the right-hand side, it's very small on that right-hand side of the first sort of screen there. It says AI linguistic checks, and you may be able to just make out the check marks. So spelling, profanities, language accuracy, global interpretation, modality. And there's also a select all button. And then once you do that and you choose the file and you submit it, the screen in the middle is what you see next. So this is kind of a little bit about the VistatecVerifier dashboard. So I won't pour into it in the interest of time and get into the questions. But it's a full visibility of what's happening there with the various content that's being reviewed, whether it's been completed or not, etc. And the third screen is kind of the outputs that you get, and that will give you everything from the name of the file. It'll obviously identify the source string, the target string. It'll give you what it's checking against, whether it's modality or profanity or spelling or whatever. But it will also give you a check assessment, which is obviously where the benefits lie. So it will say, in this area, this is the error that we're seeing. And we can also then go into a dual route. We can say, can we run this back through an automated piece to fix this? Or does this need to go to a human review process? So that's a really critical step in this new way of working and these new workflows that we have. So there's a lot more to it. We're doing an awful lot more with LLM management and AI prompting. We've got a plethora of really good consultancy services, but I'm not going to sit here and just, wax lyrical about those. Just to focus on Verifier, critical component to this. And it really does help, because you can then take those outputs back, get those errors fixed with VistaTech, for example, and then it can go back to the repo that Adam's talking about and go back to the developer, which shifts everything left massively and saves an awful lot of time at the end, instead of having to go back and check everything right at the end. So, Adam, I hope that gives a very quick synopsis. I'm keen that we get a discussion going.
Really good. Really
Thank
good.
you.
All right. Every time I hear it, it even clarifies it a little more for me. So I appreciate that. All right. All right, we're into the Q&A. I'm going to remind you, we love audience questions. So if you can write something down, that's great. I have these questions set up for Etienne ahead of time. Etienne is going to be the main focus of these first questions, because we got to make him sweat too. So, all right, very good. So, Etienne, could you see working with a system like this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you touched on the impact next for the organization, but individually, I've seen this firsthand, and I see it firsthand, and it's somewhat frustrating. One thing I said at one point to someone, to a colleague, and again, those are just my views. They don't reflect, you can go through my profile or whatever. It's not a particular company or another. But it's hard to watch. That's what I said. At times, it's really hard to watch, because on a human level, in the end, we're all humans, but I see a lot of frustration, and I literally see a lot of anguish in, my French, Spanish colleagues. I was hired for, yeah. And so anyway, I'm French and German, so that's why I meant French and Spanish colleagues. But it takes a human toll. And so a system like that, and, from the very early days of intelligence, you can keep it simple, and you can build a simple integration, but just having a basic system will make a huge difference. And so day to day, in my, when I'm wearing that hat as a linguistic engineer, where I'm generally responsible for the content of the language, it's very hard, because we often zoom in and zoom out, right? So you get bugs assigned to you, their SLAs tied to the bugs, and there is pressure. There's a lot of pressure. But you have to zoom in and zoom out very, very quickly. Your mind has to. Your imagination has to. You have to transport yourself to that spot. And it's one specific place in the application. Because remember, a lot of this is a scaling exercise. So we're dealing usually with a lot of different pieces, and you have to jump in, like your bug is just, even if you break it down into domains, right? In AI, we have domains and then functional areas and things like that of your product space. What as a QA person, someone who has to do localization or who has to do, the whatever is part of the process, and you're looking at a defect and it's been assigned to you, it's very, very stressful, especially if there is an SLA next to it. And then there is a massive amount of unknown, right? You're being asked to zoom into a very, very specific thing very, very quickly, pressure, but you really don't have any anchors to zoom in there. And so, for example, a very simple example is, I don't know, I'm looking at, my pixel, and we have a home page, right? And no, I mean the home, whatever. We call it home. In English, they call it home. And then the English UX team is still making change to it. And they want to call it, instead of calling it home, they want to call it something, like, I don't know, headquarters, whatever, for UX purposes, right? And so that's a decision that has been made all the way over there by the UX team along with the English team, and they're literally in real time working on that change. And now that change needs to somehow travel, first of all, be picked up by, the French, Germans, and all those. It needs to be somehow identified, right? And so that's where you have the first unforced error. It's a breakdown. It's a very simple breakdown where we lost the alignment, right? But assuming we do that, and a simple product will do it for you. So at that point, here as a linguistic engineer, I'm already, okay, fine, they change it from home to headquarters or whatever. It really doesn't make any difference in French or in German. It makes no difference, right? And so, but what I mean is that before I even get to that point, I'm asked to zoom in into that very specific area of the product, that domain. And what I noticed in large organization, we're missing those anchors, those reference points, right? Like, we all know where the North Pole is, and the North Pole is keeping us all straight, It's one shared anchor that we all have, the North Pole. And so what's happening is that as the organization moves very, very fast, we lose the anchors. And that's another enforced error. So that's where the product literally allows someone like me, a French linguistic engineer, to very, very quickly zoom in to that spot because I know the North Pole is there, right? And I zoom in, and then I zoom out, and I work on the next bug, right? And in some cases, if you have a good product like Adam and Simon mentioned, all this is automated, right? And so in some cases, in some organizations, they even have the linguistic engineer somehow responsible for pushing the product, building it, and pushing it to the end user, right? Because it's all supposed to be automated, and it makes perfect sense, right? Developers have worked like that for the longest time. It just, the builds happen, you have a continuous integration system, it works fine. But here, remember all this under pressure, and then I see all my colleagues literally with tears in their eyes because the SLA, they are not meeting the SLA, but they're not meeting the SLA for absolutely no reason whatsoever that has to do with their job, which is French and German. They're missing it because the build, they somehow have been put in charge of a build that breaks every other day. And if you're in a large corporation, if you operate at scale, you know that that's actually a lot more frequent than you think. And it all gets, escalated, prioritized, and goes through layers and whatnot. And it works quite fine, but it creates a tremendous amount of frustration and just on a personal level, a tremendous amount of anguish. I'm not mad, but I'm just describing a situation. And so the answer to the first question is the systems that Simon and Adam described. We can say lots of things and say, oh, it's old stuff and whatever. But the bottom line is the actual essence of it basically makes people happy. And that's the most important, really. When I coached soccer, I had this rule: do your best. For 15 years, do your best. That's rule number one. Never give up. Third rule, have fun. Simple. And if it's not fun, people don't do a good job. If people don't understand that, where they even sit in the big picture, where the anchors are, they're always confused. It's hard to zoom in and out. And it's hard to, on a concrete basis, knock out one bug after the other or work on new features. But there are fundamental misalignments, really. That's what I'm saying. And it's good to spend time with Adam and Simon and think through those in peace, in quiet, and then you can scale up. And then you can scale. Anyway, that was the answer. The answer is happy. Can you see working?
You've actually answered a few of these questions. There's a saying sort of popularized by, if you don't know Renato Beninato in this industry, you should. He's sort of like the center connecting point of everybody. He's a CEO at Nimdzi, but years ago he talked about, and it was from something that he saw happen. Like if you save your company money, they give you a Starbucks card. If you start a new way of doing things and a new initiative, and you actually spend money to get this new initiative, but it sort of fundamentally changes things, then you get a promotion. And I think this is a really hard time in localization right now. There's just a lot of people. There's a lot of layoffs. There's a lot of certainly turnover, people being asked, I see in quite a number of companies where they had 10 people in localization and now they have 2 or 1. So putting yourself in that position, how do you get organizational buy-in?
Yeah, that is, fundamentally, it's a lot about change management and, a lot of times, a lot of people within the organization know what it is that it's not, that it's broken, right? And a lot of times, a lot of people in this organization know that there is a better way. And the key is, how does the organization get to a point and understands that it's in everybody's interest to make a change, and that usually takes a lot. The first thing that we've always it's really starts at the top fundamentally. If you can impact change at the top, and then there are a lot of I think it's something that frustrates a lot of us, and a lot of people in organization, and we need something that crystallizes that change and then brings it about, and it how do you do it? I think you keep speaking up, I guess. And I think it's very unique to every organization. But what we've seen works the best with larger companies is really when it's when you have executive buy-in, because they will allow all those different teams to work. But I've also worked a lot. I prefer almost to work in the trenches with the localization teams, with the QA teams, with the developers. And there you can generally have almost like a grassroots movement where everybody's starting to pull in that direction together. And that takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of patience, and also it takes great leaders, first and foremost. A great leader, to me, one of the greatest definition of a leader is really humility. The fact that they understand that, they don't know everything, and that it's not about pitching it always. And it's also about integrity. It's about being intellectually honest with ourselves. If we do that, we've already accomplished a lot. It's like they say, do right and fear no man, right? My Baba has that, do right and fear no man. And the most important is really that, having that intellectual honesty and the humility. But that's rare in today's world, and it's even rarer among, leaders that are usually more worried about the narrative and the appearances. But the bottom line really is that people who don't have any humility they're just gonna be washed away in the bath with everybody else. It's as simple as that. You cannot compete with people who do it right. It's simple. It just doesn't work.
I want to move on here to the first question in the Q&A here, which from our friend Martine. Could you keep the translation feature as a UI stress test using real translation instead of pseudo-translated text rather than a new method for translating content? Yes, when I showed that longest string, that can be a real translation, certainly. Remember that some of this is about time. And I actually like the longest string method with a real translation better than I like pseudo-localization. A pseudo translation, what that looks like is you, for anybody who doesn't know, you assign like an open bracket on one end and a closed bracket on the other end. And in between, you put various characters around let's say the source is English, around the source string. So you see, and you might say for German, everything's going to expand by 2 or whatever the math is, and it'll insert characters. Now, one of the nice things with pseudo-localization is you actually can test the encoding. Now, I really think that's more of a developer thing, that they should be doing that. But in the case of a designer, if you have a machine, say, do the translation the first time, which you can decide, let's say you're in a regulated industry, you really want that human translation, or for whatever reason, I'm not going to, although I'll say with AI, we've had some really good results, particularly when we combine the various prompting that we have available in Localizer. But if you use something real, you really see what it's going to be. And you see that longest string that it's going to be for any locale. So that pseudo translation will actually have multiple languages, but it'll give you the worst case scenario for every button, for instance. That's what I was getting back at. There was more to that question, and it just disappeared. Hold on. I'm concerned about shifting the responsibility of initiating translation and being a gatekeeper to a designer instead of a localization PM. That's really good. So as a localization manager, I'm putting my hat on. This is my opinion. you're trying to get more realization. So like the localization manager is fundamentally in charge of the product being well represented in whatever around the world to whatever targets that you have. I mean, that's at a very high level, the raison d'etre. My French is terrible, but that's your fundamental function versus, I understand, gatekeeper. But at the same time, for designers to be able to do the good job, you have to give them some autonomy so that they can actually perform their job in a way that's going to reflect well on localization. So I would say, I'll give you some for instances. Within the Lingoport customer base, we have companies that have 500, 1,000, like many products that the localization team supports. Sometimes it's just one product, but it's usually there's some complexity. So you have not just products, but you have development teams and you have lots of repositories being where developers work, right? So by shifting left so that your designers and developers get to see the impact of localization, you're not really think of it not as a gatekeeper, but an empowerer. You're an enabler. You're doing the same things that they see in product development. Remember, the reason why Figma is popular in the first place is you could see what is this going to look like. And you're not waiting for the developer to kind of get an idea from storyboards, and that's the old way. So you're really seeing what things look like. And so the natural extension of that is letting localization see. I hope I answered that question well enough. Etienne?
Yeah, I think the key really, hopefully, that we get through this is that Adam's tools and Simon's tools, what they allow you to do is to loop faster and to iterate faster, right? And so you can do it ahead of time. As Adam mentioned, people have the benefit of the context so they can zoom in and out, knowing, what's around linguistically. But also, if you loop fast, it doesn't take, let's say, for example, 5 days for the English build to come together. It doesn't take, 5 days for that French build to go together. So you can quickly change it, because even in the case of the expansion, in other products, what you see is that there are other constraints. It's a constraints, really. What you want to look at is the spec. And then the UI is one of the constraints. The context is also, in a way, a constraint. And so, in some cases, what happens is that you have someone puts a product together, and again, there are people who don't even talk to each other, and they put the UI together, and then the UI guy's first answer, the UX guy's first answer is, well, do it shorter, like come up with a shorter French word, or come up with there's gotta be a shorter German word. And so, and that has happened. And sometimes it's just fine. Or you come up with a word that's not even a translation, right? But it's a better, from a UX standpoint, it's much, much better. So there is a little bit of a back and forth. But if you think that back and forth is impossible to do if you don't have the tools that Adam and Simon have, because those tools do a tremendous amount of checks times, I'm not kidding, 200 locales, 100 times a day, 500 times a day, 200 locales with like 1 or 2 words. That's it. And it just flows. But those tools allow you to do that at a massive scale, but it also allow you to avoid a lot of unforced errors. And I call that's what they are unforced errors. So Simon's tool allows you to avoid a massive amount of unforced errors and find those errors earlier. And quick Because remember, oftentimes those people don't talk to each other, or they have to go through their boss, who talks to a boss, who talks to a boss, and it all gets lost in translation, all of that. So if you focus on your specs a little bit more, you know, prepare a little bit more, put thought into it. It doesn't, I'm not talking about anything crazy, just an hour, 2 hours, that's it. And you will save thousands of people massive amount of anguish every single day. But besides the human aspect, you make more money and you save money. I think that's works with, that's a good point too. But anyway, it's the idea of looping and understanding what the specs are and the constraints and the anchors.
Okay, I'm going to go on to the next question. This is actually one for me. Based on the above, does Localizer have the ability to flag issues, source text length, for instance, to the designers without having the designers to look at all the translations for all the languages? Again, I am not saying the designers would look at all the languages. It's literally what's the longest string I'm going to have that I'm going to have to deal with for this, let's say, button or menu list or whatever it may be. Not necessarily here, toggle through all the locales. I think that would take too long and it would be like a big ask. But seeing what's the worst case scenario for this UI, again, there's an algorithm that we have that looks at, let's say, a machine translation or an AI, or it's all AI. Let's call it an LLM translation for that immediate feedback. All right. And so my question is based on the assumption of raw MT. Now, some of that question went away already on my UI, but you also asked about would designers be able to run some sort of a QA in Localizer? They probably want to do that in Figma, honestly, and just, rather than have a QA cycle, like see what's the worst case I'm going to deal with, and just, Figma is the tool they know, and so make changes to their UI based on that worst string scenario kind of thing happening directly in Figma. Now, there is something called Localizer QA that lets you see in context what's going on and make changes to translations, for instance. Also in Localizer's kind of UI command center, you can flag certain strings that might be problematic. It might also, let's say, the way that pluralization was handled is broken. Something like the ICU format is not properly implemented. That would be flagged also, and sort of go back probably to the developers or localization engineer. So there is a QA component that I haven't really gone into in this talk, but it's there. All right, I hope that answers it. Martine, thank you for the thank you. Got that here. And again, I'm going to mention that the idea of using what we'll call AI, the greater AI, is obviously not new to localization. We've been using machine translation forever, which is a form of AI. Generally, we're talking about LLM translation, which is sort of a different beast because there's a couple of constraints. You really need good prompting to make an LLM work well and work accurately. Just like you get better results out of a human. The other thing is that LLMs can't count. So you need to have something. It's a really funny thing. If you say to an LLM, translate this, but have it be no more than 32 characters or something, it won't get it right. So you need to have other constraints on things. It's actually kind of funny when you get into it. We've done a lot of testing in that area.
I think the question is, in terms of Figma to repo, is there a possibility to run checks for placeholders, concentrated strings, or hard-coded content? We've seen that strings that look perfectly fine in Figma are just broken content in the text files.
Right. So yes, as a matter of fact, that's some of the things that Localizer does. It will look. Often there's some file problem that's breaking it. Localizer will find that, and not only find it direct, like it ties back to the repos as well. So if it's an engineering problem, they can literally click on it and it takes them right to the line of code in their repo, and they can fix it as long as they have permissions. And for Figma, again, we just flag stuff all the time when it's physically broken, with the idea of, like, if something's wrong, you fix it really quickly.
Can I just add a quick one, Adam, if you don't mind? Just
No,
real quick, because
please.
people are asking about how many languages, that kind of stuff. I just want to make a point that we released Verifier in a beta initially, invite only. And if people want to find out more, they can just head over to VistatecVerifier.com. Head over to Lingoport's website to find out more about Localizer. VistatecVerifier is on there. We suggest that you get in touch. We can handle as many, I suppose, how long is a piece of string, but we can handle as many as the underlying AI to some degree. Now, accuracy varies, obviously, as we all know, with languages, with various training data. And some of that training data is not visible. So you have to be mindful there. And that's why we have that, human plus verifier, AI plus human expertise in terms of the approach to this. The other question that seems to come up from a few people is this concern about moving we are shifting the problem left, but they're worried about moving and encroaching localization into the design world. And from the designers that we've been speaking to, who work with very large designs in Figma, they do an awful lot of UX work for very large international clients. It's about preventing rework. It's what Etienne was referring to earlier. It's about not having to wait a week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks for something to then realize it's a problem. We're not suggesting, I don't think anybody here is suggesting that a designer becomes a localization person at all. But instead of using, and what a lot of designers do, for people here on the call, will know that they use throwaway type translations too, just to get a rough idea of what something will look like. Whereas what we're saying here is we can use the source, the translated content that's been sent across. We can check it for all those errors that we were referring to earlier, and we can push it back in so they can see it in a relatively quick period of time. And then, for stuff that's okay for sort of generic stuff, but when you're talking about designs for high risk companies, and not high risk companies, but high risk data and AI, there's an awful lot of governance. I won't go into it here, but there's an awful lot of governance that's required around some of this stuff. So you can't just put in things that haven't been through a certain amount of checks, that have been had automated checks, whether it's through Verifier. And in some of these high-risk data cases, you must have humans involved in that loop as well. That's not going to sit with the designer. In 95% of the time, designers are designing. That's what they're doing, and the localization PM is managing the other relationship. But the last thing I wanted to make on this point, I think it's an important one that we all kind of know deep down, is that these are new ways of working that weren't around, a few short months or years ago. These are new tools that are out there, and you can't just layer new technologies into old workflows, right? These are new workflows that are emerging, that are helping people to do a better job, and we're seeing, people become better at roles and being able to focus on different types of tasks, rather than get caught up in the monotony of something being wrong weeks down the road, which causes an organization to miss a release time, to not be compliant, to cause customer confusion, for something to be, incorrectly understood, the nuances lost, etc. And we're trying to bring that story to life a little bit better. But what I would encourage people, because I'm very conscious of time too, is that they get in touch for it. If this is something that's of interest to you, just reach out to myself or Adam or Etienne, and we can answer some more questions for you. And we can also, if you're interested in finding out more or even trying some of this stuff, let us know. Sorry, Adam, I just wanted to add that in. There was a few questions I just didn't want to let go by,
No, that's really good. We are kind of running out of time here. Actually, we just turned to on the hour. I'm willing to stay a little bit and answer further questions or reply via email. Maybe we could just rapid fire these for anybody who's still on the line. We have one very patient questioner. Just quote, a random question. It's really not. It's a great question. But if I want to get into localization industry, what's your best advice to start? I worked as a localization tester before, as well as a translator, but I think that quite struck if I want to do something bigger, like a linguistic engineer or NLP linguist. I got into the industry by simply suffering the problem and starting a company. So I'm not sure I'm the one you want to answer that, but maybe the two of you have a better answer than I do from experience.
A few people have asked some direct questions to the panelists here, which I'm not sure all the audience can see, but I'm happy to share some links in the public chat of how people can get in touch with VistatecVerifier. I'm not saying it's a surefire guarantee way of getting a role, but I can point people in the right direction to that for sure. Etienne, would you like to add anything in terms of that question?
Yes, no, I think you're 100% right. I would definitely recommend to reach out to Simon. But yeah, it's a very difficult time, I think, for industry in general. And we're kind of reinventing, you know. We have to reinvent, but we're not alone. There are a lot of other, you know, professions that are going through a change. It will probably vary greatly on your location, and you know, your specialties, your location will probably make a huge difference in terms of what's available out there. Knowing that at the same time, there are also a lot of businesses that are always looking for talent. And in the AI space, it's been, there's been a lot of hiring down there, brand new generations, like I said. So there have been a lot of, you can be in touch, but I mean, Simon and VistatecVerifier are definitely better places.
All right. I think this is our last one. It's kind of an involved question, but I'm just going to go to what I think is the heart of it, which is how should we evaluate the systemic risks of role boundary erosion? That's come up a couple of times. Like if I'm a localization manager, the designer is now doing all this stuff with translation, you know, like are we going to butt heads and that sort of thing? And I don't really see things that way. Honestly, you know, for me, being able to duplicate yourself, duplicate at least some of your responsibilities, to me, is how you scale. I have yet to meet the localization team that isn't incredibly understaffed for what they do. I mean, I've maybe seen something like that in like some Silicon Valley companies that you know, I can think of one that had like 24 people in their group, but that's it's like highly unusual. More likely is like one customer that we have in common, Simon and I, that we talked about last week. She's one person and she's handling the localization for a public company that has all kinds of products. So any way that you can extend yourself should be seen as something good to empower your teams. Remember, localization is just, it's a lot more than QA. It's a lot more than hiring a translation vendor. It should, to elevate yourself, you're looking at markets, you're looking at how this is going to impact your company. You're able to say, hey, if we do this, we get that. If we're more nimble as a company, if we're faster, we get this out of it. And less, maybe I'm missing the points, but really, you know, we carry the baton in the localization industry for going forth and making products that work better around the world. That's our main baton, you know, and so keep that in mind. And of course, it's going to come down to you whether something is well executed. But you know, to get a little help in the organization and enable them to do some of that, I only see that that's only goodness is how I see that. So You're welcome to, like if you want to talk about that more, just email me at adam@lingoport.com. I'm traveling this week, but I always love when people reach out to me. So go ahead. And Simon, you may feel the same as well. So
yeah, and I'm first name dot last name at vistatec.com.
Yeah. Good. All right. So thank you, Etienne, for being our guest, letting us put you on the spot. And I wrote down a couple of high-level things you wrote about, which I think we simply cannot forget in this time of history in terms of humility and integrity. I think those are our friends, and always always validating. So thank you very much. And thanks to all the guests who hung on, and especially there's still a whole bunch of you here. So thank you. And take care, everyone. All right, Simon, do you have another webinar coming that you want to announce?
We've got a number of things coming up. What I direct people to is you head over to vistatec.com or follow us on social media, particularly LinkedIn. We post all our events there, and we'd love you to jump in. We've got something coming up which is going to be very interesting on localizing luxury, which is particularly of interest. And we've got some AI events coming up as well that we'd like you to have a look at. So just head over to vistatec.com and definitely check us out on LinkedIn. Go to the official Vistatec home on LinkedIn, because we have some of our events coming up there. So we'd love to see you there too. But thank you to Etienne, Adam, and thank you to everybody who's joined us and all the great questions we had today. I'm sorry we didn't get through all of them and that we've ran well over time here. Obviously an interesting discussion, but thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. And I'll just say follow Lingoport or follow me personally online. So great. Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Take care. Bye-bye.